The hospital hummed with the low, steady beeps of monitors and the occasional rustle of hurried footsteps. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold glow on the pristine white floors, making the long corridors seem endless. It was past midnight, and while most of the world slept, the hospital pulsed with quiet urgency. Dr. Kwame Mensah took a deep breath as he stepped into the staff lounge, the weight of the night's emergencies pressing against his temples. His white coat, once crisp, was now creased, a testament to the grueling shift. He ran a hand over his short, neatly trimmed hair, exhaling as he reached for the coffee pot. "Long night," a voice floated toward him. He turned to see Nurse Aisha Kamau leaning against the counter, stirring a cup of tea. Her uniform clung to her slender frame, and a few loose strands of hair had escaped the tight bun at the nape of her neck. She looked at him with a small, knowing smile, her dark eyes glinting under the dim lighting. Kwame hesitated before responding. "Is there ever a short one?" Aisha chuckled, her laughter light yet full of something else, something unreadable. "I suppose not." She lifted the cup to her lips, taking a slow sip before setting it down. "You're here later than usual." "Emergency in the surgical ward," Kwame replied. "A car accident victim, internal bleeding. We barely stabilized him." He finally poured his coffee, his fingers tightening around the cup. "And you? Why are you still here? Covering for someone?" Aisha shrugged, tapping her nails against the counter. "Though I don't mind. Nights like these have their moments." Her words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken meaning. Kwame pretended not to notice, focusing on his coffee instead. He had worked with Aisha for almost a year now, and while their interactions had always been professional, there had always been something beneath the surface, a current neither of them acknowledged. She was young, vibrant, and confident in a way that made people gravitate toward her. He had watched her handle high-pressure situations with composure, had seen the way she could switch from warm and empathetic to sharp and assertive in an instant. But there was also something daring about her, something that made her unpredictable. "Dr. Mensah," she said, drawing his attention back. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Go ahead. Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. His grip on the cup tightened slightly. "Happy," he echoed, stalling for time. "Yes." Aisha studied him, her head tilting slightly. "You always look tired. Not just from the job. There's something else." Kwame let out a small chuckle, though it lacked humor. "That's an awfully personal question for a work conversation." "Maybe," she smiled. "But you didn't say no." He met her gaze then, really met it, and for a fleeting moment something shifted between them. The silence stretched just long enough for it to feel significant. Then, before he could formulate a response, the overhead speakers crackled to life. "Code Blue ISU. Code Blue I." Kwame straightened, the moment shattered. "That's us," he said, already moving. Aisha followed without another word, their conversation unfinished yet lingering. As they rushed down the hallway, Kwame couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set into motion, something he wasn't sure he could stop. The ICU was a storm of controlled chaos. A team of nurses and doctors surrounded the patient, a middle-aged man whose heart had just stopped. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air as the monitor's frantic beeping pulsed through the room. Dr. Kwame Mensah snapped on a pair of gloves, his mind locking into focus. "What's his status?" he asked, moving toward the patient's side. "Cardiac arrest. No pulse for the last 45 seconds, a nurse reported. "Charge to 200 joules," Kwame ordered. The defibrillator paddles were handed to him, and he positioned them against the patient's chest. "Clear." A shock surged through the man's body, his back arching before falling limply against the bed. The monitor remained a flat, merciless line. "Again," Kwame said, his voice sharper now. "Another charge, another shock." "Nothing." Aisha Kamau moved closer, pressing down firmly as she resumed chest compressions, her arms steady, her movements precise. Her jaw was set with determination, a bead of sweat sliding down her temple. Kwame tried again. Clear. The jolt sent a shudder through the patient's body. Then, a flicker of rhythm. The monitor let out a slow, irregular beep. "We've got a pulse," Aisha breathed. Relief passed through the team like a wave. The tension in Kwame's shoulders eased, but his gaze lingered on Aisha. The ICU's fluorescent lighting cast a glow on her skin, illuminating the strength in her stance. She met his eyes just for a second before looking away. The rest of the resuscitation team took over, stabilizing the patient, but Kwame remained still for a moment. His heartbeat was steady, yet there was something unsettling beneath the surface, a feeling he refused to name. Later, when the ICU had quieted, Kwame stepped out into the empty corridor. The night shift had settled into its usual rhythm, the earlier intensity fading into silence. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders, but before he could fully relax, he heard a voice behind him. "You hesitated." He turned to find Aisha leaning against the wall, her arms crossed. Kwame frowned. "I didn't hesitate." Aisha held his gaze, unconvinced. "Not with the patient. With me." A slow tension unfurled between them, more tangible than the space that separated them. Kwame sighed, rubbing his temple. "Aisha, let's not. You look at me like there's something you want to say but won't." Her voice was softer now, almost careful. "Like you're fighting something." Kwame opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth balanced on the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed it down. "We work together. That's all this is." Aisha's smile was knowing. "Is it?" Kwame stepped back, needing the distance. "I have a wife," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "I know." Aisha pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Not close enough to touch, but enough to unsettle him. "I don't expect anything from you, Dr. Mensah. But don't lie to yourself." The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. Kwame turned, watching as the night security guard Samuel strolled past, his eyes flicking between them with mild curiosity. Aisha gave Kwame one last look before walking away, her steps slow, deliberate. Kwame stayed rooted in place, his pulse thrumming in his ears. He should have felt relieved that she was gone. Instead, he felt the weight of everything left unsaid. The dim glow of the hospital corridor lights cast long shadows as Dr. Kwame Mensah made his way to his office. The silence of the late shift was usually a comfort, a rare moment to breathe between emergencies. But tonight it carried weight, presence, a thought that refused to settle. He unlocked the door, stepping into the small, cluttered space that had become his second home. Papers lay scattered across his desk, medical journals stacked in uneven piles. He should have reviewed patient charts, answered emails, anything to distract himself. Instead, he sat down, exhaling as he leaned back against the chair, his mind circling the conversation with Aisha. "You hesitated. Not with the patient. With me." Her words clung to him, refusing to be dismissed. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was soft, almost hesitant. For a brief second he considered ignoring it. But when he pulled the door open, Aisha stood there, her expression unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked. Kwame hesitated, then stepped aside. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Aisha moved toward his desk, trailing her fingers along the edge, her movements slow, deliberate. "You left in a hurry earlier," she said. Kwame folded his arms. It was getting late. She turned to face him, eyes searching his. "You know, most people would call what we have tension." He let out a sharp breath. "Aisha, we work together. That's all this is." She tilted her head, as if weighing his words. "You said that before. Do you believe it yet?" Kwame clenched his jaw. "It doesn't matter what I believe." Silence settled between them, thick and charged. Aisha's gaze softened. "I don't want to make things difficult for you, Kwame." His name on her lips sent a ripple through him. She rarely said it, not like this. Not in a way that made him feel seen, understood in a way he hadn't realized he craved. "I should go," she said, though she didn't move. He should have let her. He should have stepped back, created the distance they both needed. Instead, he found himself reaching out, his fingers barely grazing her wrist before he caught himself. Aisha's breath hitched. Neither of them moved. Somewhere down the hall, footsteps echoed, a distant reminder of the world beyond this room. Kwame pulled away first. "This can't happen," he murmured. Aisha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I know." But the way she looked at him, the way her lips parted slightly as if there was more she wanted to say, it told him otherwise. She turned, opening the door, pausing just before stepping out. "Good night, Dr. Mensah." Kwame swallowed hard. "Good night, Nurse Kamau." As the door clicked shut, he ran a hand down his face, his pulse unsteady. He had drawn a line. He just wasn't sure how long it would hold.